All right, so we've spent the last 2 days on photosynthesis, and so today we're going to kind of wrap it up. Day one was all about energy and how we use cellular energy, how cellular energy is universal, and we talked about the molecule ATP. Yesterday, we talked about light, how light energy is transmitted. We talked about the structure of the chloroplast, and we got a very, very rough outline of the process of photosynthesis. So today is day 3. We're going to get a little bit more detailed. So photosynthesis day 3 is all about the process. So yesterday we talked about the difference between the light reactions and the Calvin cycle. So we're going to go straight into the light dependent reactions and straight into the light dependent reactions and learn a little bit more about how that process works. So A is the light dependent reaction. In our light dependent reactions, we use energy from the sun to produce oxygen and convert ADP and NADP plus into ATP and NADPH. So we use solar energy to convert ADP and NADP plus to ATP and NADPH. These two is where we get our energy. Those are electron carriers. Those are where the energy is at. If you see ADP or NADP plus, that is our low energy form of the process. So this process occurs in the thylakoid membrane. If you remember from yesterday, the thylakoid membrane are those flattened stacks of like little circles that are inside the chloroplast, the third membrane of the chloroplast. And when I say in the membrane, I mean it is embedded in the actual membrane. Because embedded in the membrane we have clusters of proteins and chlorophyll that we call photosystems. So when we talked about cell membranes, we talked about how there are a lot of proteins and carbohydrates and other molecules embedded in those membranes. That's why we called it a fluid mosaic. And the thylakoid membrane is no different. In our thylakoid membrane, we have special clumps of proteins, and they are called photosystems. A photosystem absorbs sunlight to generate high energy electrons. That's the whole point of photosystems. Photosystems absorb sunlight, that's why they have the chlorophyll, generates high energy electrons, which we pass to electron carriers. Just like I used the potato example yesterday, right? When we had a hot potato in an oven and we needed to get it to the plate, we had to use a special carrier or that oven mitt to get it from one place to another. So the photosystems, what they do is they have all these chlorophylls and all these proteins, and the sunlight hits those chlorophylls, and then those electrons are excited and they pass those electrons to these electron carriers. So that is what a photosystem does. There are two types of photosystems that take place in the process. We're going to outline that process. So the light reactions happens in 4 steps, right? Yes, light reactions happens in 4 steps, or light dependent reactions rather. And it starts, the first step is photosystem 2. So there are 2 types of photosystems, photosystem 1 and photosystem 2. The reason they are named 1 and 2 is because they were named after the order that they were discovered, not the order in which they take place in this process. So, in the light-dependent reactions, photosystem 2 is first. I know it's wonky, but photosystem 2 is first. We will also call that PS2. Try not to get it confused with PlayStation 2s, even though they are really fun. So, photosystem 2 happens first. That is the first step in the light reactions. It absorbs light. Because it's got those chlorophylls. Which means we raise the electron energy. We've got high energy electrons because that light was absorbed. We absorb that light, and that light raises the energy of electrons. So, those high energy electrons I'm going to abbreviate electrons E minus. Those high energy electrons are passed to an electron transport chain. An electron transport chain is a series of electron carriers. And we'll get more into that in step 2. So far in the light reactions, we hit photosystem 2, it absorbs light. We now have high energy electrons. Those high energy electrons are passed to electron carriers. But we do something else in photosystem 2, and that is we split water, or we don't do it, I guess chloroplasts do. We split water for more electrons. Because whenever we pass an electron to something else, we need to kind of replenish. So we split water to get even more electrons. This is where our oxygen is released. And hydrogen is left behind. How are we doing? That's step 1. So far, we have had a photon of light, or just light in general, hit photosystem 2. Photosystem 2 has raised the energy of some electrons and passed it to an electron transport chain. While doing this, it also split a molecule of water, released the oxygen because we didn't need that, and left the hydrogen behind. Step 2 is the electron transport chain. As those electrons are passed from carrier to carrier to carrier, so as electrons are passed from carrier to carrier, some of that energy is used to pump hydrogen ions into the thylakoid space. So, let's see. Might be beneficial for me to draw this out. Yeah, why not? So, we have our thylakoid membrane, right? We'll say we've zoomed in on one of the stacks. In the thylakoid membrane, we have a series of proteins. And when an electron, we'll say, or when light, I guess, the lightning bolt light, hits this photosystem 2, it will send electrons to the electron transport chain. Electron transport chain. And in that electron transport chain, they are going to pump hydrogen ions into the thylakoid space. Okay. I cleared up a little bit better. No. All right. So, step 3. We get to photosystem 1. Photosystem 1, the electrons are re-energized. Electrons re-energized. Because photosystem 1 has those pigments. So the sun can hit the photosystem 1 and re-energize those electrons because we've lost energy pumping in those hydrogen ions. There is, it is similar to photosystem 2, but it does not split water. Because in photosystem 2, we've got water coming into it and hydrogen ions and oxygen coming out of it. Then we pass to a second electron transport chain. Or not we, I guess, but electrons are passed to a second electron transport chain. And in that electron transport chain, we take the energy from those electrons and turn NADP plus into NADPH. If you want to put the little energy lines around it, now we are energized. So our electrons move from the electron transport chain to photosystem 1 and into the second electron transport chain and come out as NADPH. Then we hit step 4. Step 4 is hydrogen ion movement. Or H plus. And ATP formation. So, right now, our thylakoid space is filling up with hydrogen ions. So as our first electron transport chain keeps pumping in hydrogen ions and we keep splitting water, our thylakoid is filling up with hydrogen ions. But we learned about diffusion and how ions want to move from an area of high concentration to an area of low concentration. So those hydrogen ions want out. But they can't pass through this membrane. H plus has to pass through a special protein called ATP synthase. If it ends in ACE, that means it is an enzyme. So it will catalyze a reaction. So if this, we'll put it up here, it'll kind of look like this. our hydrogen ions will move through our ATP synthase to get out. And as they do, as ions pass through, they use that energy. ATP synthase uses that energy to turn ADP into ATP. So we have an ADP and a phosphate, and it'll go into and out of ATP synthase and come out ATP. So our final products for the light reactions are NADPH and ATP. And those go to the Calvin cycle, which, if you remember, is in the stroma. So it's out here already with the ATP and the NADPH. It's not in the thylakoid membrane. That's the light-dependent reactions. So during the day, whenever plants are being struck by light, this is happening. If they have water and they have light, they can do this process. They can make ATP and they can make NADPH, which is good. We like ATP, but we learned that ATP isn't super stable on its own. It's not great at long-term storage. So we have to take that energy and make sugars that we can use. And that is where the Calvin cycle comes into play. The Calvin cycle happens in the stroma. And what happens is that NADPH and ATP are used with carbon dioxide to make high energy sugars. And that's what we eat to stay alive. Now, instead of going step by step and doing like it all out in words, I'm gonna kind of draw it out. That way, it's not as long of a process. So, I'll let you get that down first. We're going to start with carbon dioxide. 6 of them, to be exact, because that's what goes into the cycle. Carbon dioxide enters the cycle and combines with 5 carbon sugar molecules, producing 12 3 carbon sugar molecules. So 6 carbon dioxides enter. Carbon dioxide has 1 carbon. These little dots, these little black dots are going to represent carbon. That's a carbon molecule. So 6 CO2s enter and combine with 6 5 carbon sugars to make 12 3 carbon sugars. So we have our cycle. We're entering our cycle. And now we have 12 3-carbon sugars. Just like that. What's going to happen is we are going to use ATP. We're going to use it up. And now we're going to have ADP. We're going to have NADPH. We're going to use it up and get back to NADP plus. And now we have still 12 3-carbon sugars, but they're a lot higher energy. I'll scroll back up in a second. So our energy from ATP and NADPH are used to convert the 3-carbon sugars into high energy 3-carbon sugars. So it's a cycle, right? What's going to happen is 2 of those are going to break off. And the rest are going to go back into the cycle. Two of them to make sugars. If you remember, glucose is C6H12O6. So these 2 3-carbon sugars are going to combine to make glucose. But the rest, the other 10 of these, we're going to use more ATP. We're going to get ADP back. And we're going to get 6 5-carbon sugars. And those 5-carbon sugars are going to combine with those 1-carbon sugars and create 12 3-carbon sugars. And the cycle restarts. So, carbon dioxide will enter and we will use all of the ATP and NADPH that we made in the light reactions to keep transforming and transforming and transforming our carbon molecules. We'll get 2 out, but the rest will have to go back in to restart the cycle. We've officially converted energy from the sun into sugars by using that ATP and that NADPH to make these sugars that we can eat. How we doing? Okay. I am going to draw this out one last time just to kind of drive that home because you don't have an exit ticket today. So, we are going to redraw our chloroplasts, and I highly, 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 highly recommend this gets in your notes. So we've got our chloroplasts, right? We have our two outer membranes, our two inner membranes. We have our thylakoids. And we have our stroma, which, like we said, was just the liquid outsides. The first step is the light reactions. The light reactions, remember, happen on that thylakoid membrane. We have water and light, and they are going to go into those thylakoid membranes. The light is going to be captured by the chlorophyll. And out of the light reactions, we're going to get oxygen. We are going to get NADPH, and we are going to get ATP. And those are going to go to the Calvin cycle. Those NADPHs and those ATPs are going to enter that Calvin cycle along with some carbon dioxide gas from the outside. And what we get out of it is sugar. Remember from yesterday, the equation for photosynthesis was 6 CO2 plus 6 H2O plus light energy will give us 6 O2 and C6 H12O6. So technically what you could do is if you wanted to zoom in on this thylakoid membrane right here, it would look like what I have up on the board with these photosystems and that ATP synthase. Does anybody have any questions? All right.